Did the internet hear me make that noise?
They just heard you say that.
Amazing. Hi, everyone. Welcome to room 13. Yay. My name's Olivia. Is this on?
I don't think so. Yeah.
Hey,
There she goes.
I'm on.
No, you're on.
You're always on.
Thanks, John Finley. Hi, my name's Olivia Sobre. I'm the marketing manager for Chicago for Chicagoans. We are a nonprofit that creates Chicago-based programming by Chicagoans, for Chicagoans. Tourists welcome, but know what the Great Fire is. So we are a completely volunteer-run organization. Patty behind the camera, making sure our friends at home via Facebook can see what's happening. Steph, who let you in the door today. Me, who walked around, gave you a punch card, and asked you to remind me of your name. Welcome back, friends. I know I recognize you. So being a nonprofit, volunteer-run, we are completely donation-based. So that helps us pay our speakers, research new neighborhoods to explore and present and share with you. So please, if you are so inspired, we have QR codes all over the place. Those tuning in at home, there's a link in the Facebook. We also accept cash, firstborn children, kidneys, checks, whatever is easy. So our programming this winter for our winter lecture series focuses on how Chicago and Chicagoans have influenced the world and the community. So every week, tune back in, get your tickets, come here and learn about all the ways we have been an influential city. Tickets are released 2 weeks ahead of time. Folks, I'm so sorry, Stinky Sewage next week with Patty is very sold out. It is so sold out. But hope is not lost. Get on the wait list, that's your first avenue of success. Organize a watch party at home with your friends. There are so many other ways. Tickets were released today for our lecture in 2 weeks. That is Marathon and Marathon Accomplishments with the amazing Courtney joining us for her debut lectures with us. Woo-hoo-hoo. But tonight, you all are so lucky to hear from the amazing Walter Kiefer. Yay! Longtime Roscoe Village resident, our local guide for our walking tours in Lakeview and Ravenswood Industrial Corridor, thank you so much, and also a biking enthusiast. So without further ado, Walter!
Get my drink over here. All right. Audio good to go?
Yeah.
Sweet. Awesome. All right, thank you, Patty, and Chicago for Chicagoans for having me back at room 13 for I believe, the fourth time to talk to you all about some Chicago history. So I've talked about Chicago's railroads, their early aviation history, steamships, and so it kind of makes sense that we're keeping the transportation theme going with bicycles, although at this point I'm kind of running low on transportation devices. Maybe the next one's going to be Segways, I don't know. So, scooters, sure. So about 5 years ago, I actually took a tour of Chicago's biking history with this company called Biketropolis, led by a group of biking enthusiasts, riding the old-fashioned high-wheel bikes. They call themselves the wheelmen, the old-fashioned term for a biker, which was just awesome. We turned a lot of heads just biking through the city on these old, things from the 1880s rolling by. So I'll be drawing a lot from what I learned on that tour on this talk. So this is kind of one of the rare times where the topic is going to be very largely centered around one particular individual and one particular company. You can probably guess what that individual and what that company is from the password for tonight. So we're going to cover, of course, Schwinn, but also how the bike impacted society in general in Chicago and around the country. So you've got your visual aids in front of you. Feel free to look at those as I talk. If you're watching at home, there's a link to these slides so you can look at those pictures as well. So of course, the bicycle as we know it was not invented in Chicago. It actually comes from France. Yeah. We don't invent every little thing. Sometimes we import things. So the French gave us the velocipede. That's the first sort of version of the bicycle from the 1860s. It's a picture of that in slide 2. They were heavy, they were expensive, they were unsafe, which made them pretty attractive to wealthy young men who could afford such things. In the 1870s, that is when the high wheeler comes out, largely due to an inventor named James Starley from Coventry, England. The cranks and the pedals were directly attached to the front wheel, which was as large as 5 feet in diameter, which provided the only means to go faster before the advent of sprockets and chains. You might have heard the very Victorian term, the penny farthing, for this kind of bicycle. That comes from the penny being larger than a farthing, those two coins from England. And it's actually a derisive term that came later, and it kind of meant that you were riding on your old grandfather's bicycle, because they very much went out of fashion very quickly. Yep. So if you look at the picture there, you got the old Columbia bicycle, the high wheeler there, very indicative of the 1880s. Because what happens is, in 1884, the safety bicycle comes around. It was invented by James Starley's nephew. The safety bicycle, big difference, comes with two wheels of the same size rather than vastly different sizes. The crank connected to a sprocket that runs to a chain to the rear axle with proper gear ratios to allow for speed. So that configuration basically became the standard bicycle frame for the next 100 years, really to this day. So it's kind of pretty amazing that the bicycle configuration that we know was essentially developed from scratch in 20 years. And really has not changed other than the details. So you have, going clockwise, you got the velocipede from the 1860s, the high wheeler from the 1880s, safety bike in the mid-1880s, and that's it. The modern bicycle is basically done. So Ignaz Schwinn, he is going to weave his way through my little story here, kind of like a bicycle through traffic. Can't just talk, yeah, okay. I'll be here all night. What's that? Yes. Oh, shots fired. Hey, trying to make this a bike-friendly city, people. So Ignaz Schwinn was born in 1860 in Germany near Frankfurt. He would have certainly been aware of the safety bike when it came out in the 1880s, and he started tinkering with designs with absolutely no interest from other manufacturers until he found a factory owner named Heinrich Kleyer of the Kleyer Bicycle Works, who took his designs to heart. He quickly became the general manager of the plant and produced one of the first diamond frames in Germany, and the company quickly became one of Germany's best-known bicycle makers. He visited relatives in Hamburg, Germany, and noticed all the ships leaving for America from that port city and joined them in 1891 to come to Chicago. When Ignaz Schwinn came to Chicago in 1891, at the time, the biggest bicycle maker at the time was a man by the name of Albert Pope from Springfield, Massachusetts. He founded the Pope Manufacturing Company and began making high wheelers. After he visited the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition of 1876, very important expo, he saw the high wheelers being debuted there and just fell in love with the bicycle and decided to introduce his own model in 1888. And 10 years later, Pope's Columbia bicycles, which I have a picture of there, were a national phenomenon, and they became the largest employer in New England. So Albert Pope was kind of like the Wright brothers and the Wright brothers and the Henry Ford of the bicycle, in the sense that he didn't invent the bicycle, but he became the sole owner of the patent of the bicycle. So I've read many books about the Wright brothers since I'm from Ohio originally. We're very proud of the Wright brothers. Yes. Of course, they got their start making bicycles as well. The Wright Flyer, the engine transmission is essentially bicycle sprockets and chains. And so where the Wright brothers succeeded in inventing the first powered controllable airplane, they also succeeded in acquiring and defending to the last inch a very expansive patent for the airplane, to the detriment of other would-be competitors. So they had a very long and sort of well-documented patent battle with Glenn Curtiss over the wing warping technique that was used to control aircraft, and demanding license fees from other inventors, which unfortunately did set America back about a decade when it came to aircraft innovation. And so by the time World War I broke out, American aviators were all flying French planes. So Albert Pope was no exception in this. The patent for the bicycle was already issued to a Frenchman named Lallemand. And Pope bought the patent and believed that because he owned the patent, he owned the rights to any vehicle whatsoever with two wheels, cranks, and pedals. So like the Wright brothers, he got this patent and he enforced it. He began demanding fees from every bicycle maker in the United States, and he got them. So, yeah, very rude. it's an interesting era in history because the 1880s to the turn of the century is when the bicycle, the internal combustion engine, the automobile, I mean, all kinds of technology is being developed at this time. And patents are being issued in a very expansive way to these people that are supposed to be used to encourage innovation, but were used to stifle it by certain people who are very aggressive in enforcing it. So fortunately, patents only have a certain lifespan. They expire after a while. And the bicycle patent expired in 1883, which is very sort of fortuitous because that's when all these other inventors stepped in and developed the safety bicycle. So Pope ended up sort of meeting his match in the bicycle world with another inventor also in Massachusetts named Albert Overman, whose factory in Massachusetts was called the most efficient in the world. Overman also developed the diamond frame geometry, a spring front fork assembly, and an early pneumatic tire, all of which would become standard in bikes in the future. So by the end of the 1890s, there were 8,000 patents on file at the Patent Office, which accounted for 2/3 of all the patents. So very exciting experimental time for bicycles and for a lot of technology at the time. So going back to Chicago here, when Ignaz Schwinn arrived in Chicago in 1891 to try his hand at bicycle making, he was entering a very sort of unruly and experimental world. So it was really never in doubt that he was to choose Chicago because at this time, 1891, it's a magnet for new industry. It's 20 years after the Great Fire. It's the hub for the nation's railroad and shipping network. And he was very keenly aware that the World's Columbian Exposition was to occur 2 years after he arrived in 1893. So bicycles were very much at the World's Fair. They were relegated to the upper level of Louis Sullivan's transportation building, whereas the prime space was given to the railroads and the carriage makers. One exhibitor even had a home trainer with rollers and odometers. So kind of like an early Peloton of like the 1890s. So if Chicago was not the biggest bicycle maker in the country before the fair, it certainly became so after the fair. So in slide 3, go to slide 3 there. See a couple of images here from the 1890s after the bicycle sort of became very popular in Chicago. We have 2 pictures, both of which in Lincoln Park, right by the Grant statue, if you're familiar with where that is, right by the Lincoln Park Zoo. I found 2 pictures of basically the same shot of people riding around in these bicycles. So obviously Lincoln Park was a very popular place to ride bicycles, and you just see like men and women all biking around equally. Well, more about that later. Yes. So slide 4, the early Chicago bicycle makers. One of the earliest bicycle manufacturers in the city was a company called Gormuley and Jeffrey. They started making high-wheel bicycles under license from Pope until his beloved patent expired in 1883. One of their models featured an elastic joint which absorbed, quote, nearly all the vibration caused by car tracks or cobblestones. Remember, there are certainly no bike paths or even paved roads at the time. So, you could bike, but it wasn't exactly a very pleasant experience. There was no pneumatic tires yet. Your wheel would have been just wood, perhaps with a hard rubber layer around the outside of it. So their bike was called the American Rambler. They also introduced new saddle designs and a cushion tire for a slightly smoother ride. After the bicycle boom ended at the turn of the century, Jeffrey moved on to the automobile, as did many other bicycle makers did, and moved to Kenosha, Wisconsin. If the American Rambler rings... Oh, man. We don't like Kenosha? Why not? Yeah. If the American Rambler rings a bell to you, that is because Gormuley and Jeffrey became Nash Motors, which became American Motors Corporation, AMC, that produced the American Rambler car until 1969. Yes, so the Rambler car came from the Rambler bicycle. Another up-and-comer at the time was Western Wheel Works. They were located on 1300 North Wells Street.
Where?
1300 North Wells, yes. Let's see here. Yes. Go to slide 5. I got some pictures of Western Wheel Works. The factory is still there. The factory closed in 1981 and was developed into the Cobbler Square apartment buildings. Yeah, sure. There we go. Yeah, so I got some pictures of the before and after, this factory back in the day, and then if you look at the side of the building, you can still see it says 1891 Western Wheel Works right on the side of the building there. It's very cool. They even paved the courtyard with 1880s Chicago alley bricks, and I'm sure Patty knows all about what those are. I assume that means they're wooden bricks, but I'm not sure. No? Still no? Okay. Yeah. So, yeah. Yay for historically sensitive redevelopment. So many smaller bicycle makers in the trade, along with countless parts suppliers and retailers, kind of all assembled themselves on a stretch of Wabash Avenue in the loop that became known as Bicycle Row. Ignaz Schwinn's first opportunity when he got off the train in Chicago would have been with one of those companies, the Hill Cycle Manufacturing Company, which hired him on the basis of Clyer's recommendation way back from Germany. So let's talk about bicycling for women at the time. Okay. It wasn't just for men. So by the 1890s, the bicycle boom, there were more than 100 bicycle clubs in Chicago, and the bicycle was really making inroads into all corners of society. This wasn't just for daredevils anymore. It increased mobility for the working class, it allowed people to explore outside their neighborhoods, and was a crucial component of the women's suffrage movement. Absolutely crucial. So the wheel, as it was called back then, the wheel, freed women from the bustles and the corsets, which were only starting to drop away from fashion in polite society, and gave way to bloomers. Bloomers are, so if you go to Stephanie's talk later on, she'll tell you all about bloomers and fashion. I know nothing about fashion. Bloomers, I think, are just like big baggy pants that were invented by a woman named Amelia Bloomer. And obviously you can't ride on a bicycle if you're wearing a hoop skirt with a corset or anything like that. You have to be wearing pants of some sort. So basically the bicycle freed women from the corset and required them to wear pants if they wanted to ride a bicycle. So allowed them to move freely around the city without a male escort. If you were a woman at the time and you wanted to go out in society, you had to have an escort with you. Not so with a bicycle. Now you can go wherever you want, whenever you want. Very dangerous, very scandalous. So on slide 6, you see, I found a really funny picture here of a man and a woman biking together, just like towering over everything. You've got like carriages and horses just being like trampled by the bicycle. I just love it. And then the women like equal with the man biking right next to him. So the bicycle counted among its proponents Evanston's own Frances Willard, yeah, who's of course a suffragist and also the president of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, advocated for temperance. So temperance and suffrage, the women's suffrage movements kind of went hand in glove at this time. Susan B. Anthony, also a huge fan. Yeah. Susan B. Anthony, she has a great quote about the bicycle. She said, quote, "Let me tell you what I think of bicycling. I think it has done more to emancipate women than anything else in the world. It gives women a feeling of freedom and self-reliance. I stand and rejoice every time I see a woman ride by on a wheel, the picture of free, untrammeled womanhood." You don't get a better endorsement than that. Yeah. So bicycle racing is another big component of bicycling at the time. So Overman and Pope back in Boston had sponsored riders back in New England. However, the very first World Championships of bicycle racing was held in Chicago in August of 1893 during the World's Fair. Ignaz Schwinn himself managed a team from the Hill Company. Racers met at a 1/3 mile track encircling the South Side Ballpark, which is located where Sox Park is today. It was the home of which baseball team? Southside Park? Does anybody know?
No.
Not the White Sox. Yeah. Cubs got their start in the Southside, people. Yeah, the Cubs got their start there. Yeah. Yeah. So incidentally, the United States won 2 of the 3 gold medals awarded that day in the sprint and the 10-kilometer events. Very first bicycle race. 1896, Chicago dedicated a new cement cycling racetrack over at Garfield Park. At the inauguration, there were 25,000 people cramming the grounds. Very, very big deal. It was kind of like car racing wasn't really a thing yet, so bicycle racing was a huge pastime to watch. Schwinn had a racing team. They set records there in the pace mile and the 5-mile events. The pacers in front would ride on this ridiculous 5-wheeled multicycle, as it was called, also designed by Schwinn. So you'd have 5 guys on the same bike pacing the racing bicycle. All Schwinn. Got a picture of it somewhere. Yeah. Slide 9, there's a picture of that. There was also a racetrack over Washington Park. Palmer Square, if you've ever been there, there's sort of like an oval track there. That also became famous for bikers tearing around the oval at breakneck speed, which earned them the nickname of Scorchers. Okay. Yes. Ignaz actually built his mansion there at Palmer Square. It's not there anymore. It's part of the church, I believe, that's there. Picture of his mansion is on slide 8 with Ignaz in front on a car. So he's a big car fan as well. So the founding of the Schwinn Company. Slides are all jacked up. There we go. Okay. So Arnold Schwinn and Company, slide 7, 1895. Ignaz Schwinn has been in Chicago for 4 years now. He reached out to another German in Chicago, a meat packer by the name of Adolf Arnold, and they agreed to start a new bicycle company focused on high-quality bikes. At the time, there was something like 100 bicycle makers in Chicago. There was more bicycle makers in Chicago than any other city. It was like the Detroit of bicycles, basically. So, like, they're coming into this very sort of crowded world here, and how are they going to distinguish themselves? They're going to make the best high-quality bikes possible. Their very first factory, I've got pictures of all 3 of their factories here. The first one was on Lake and Peoria Street, just west of the Loop. It is still there. It is now condos. I have a before and after of the first factory there. To the right of that picture is their second factory, which was located at 1901 North Costner Avenue in the Hermosa neighborhood. That building is also still there. It is home to a cidery called Right B Cider. I actually visited them during Open House Chicago this year. They explained the name to me. So the owner is a husband and wife couple, and they also make honey with beehives up on the roof. And so the wife doesn't drink beer, but so she wanted to make cider. So her husband said, "Okay, I'll make cider right beside her. Right B Cider." You get it? Yeah. It's a cool name. Right B Cider. Yes. So when I visited the cidery, they actually had some old 1950s Schwinns right in their tap room as a nod to the building's history. The third and biggest factory was built in 1905 on Kildare Avenue, right by the Chicago Northwestern Railroad. And sadly, that building has not survived. It is now a park. But those 3 factories, that's where all the Schwinns were made in Chicago from 1895 up until like 1982. Every bike made by Schwinn was made in Chicago up until that point. And actually, if you have a Schwinn pre-82, which is I believe when they moved production elsewhere, if you can find like the stamp on the bike that has a serial number on it, there's a whole catalog that will tell you like the exact month and where the exact month that bike was made. So one of Schwinn's early successes was with a model called the World Cycle. Slide 9. I'll get the early Schwinn models there. The World Cycle had a very cool logo on their ads with belt encircling the world, kind of very, very reminiscent of the Schlitz logo. If you see those Schlitz tied houses all over Chicago, they all have this sort of kind of similar vibe. The world being encircled by a belt logo. Chicago was becoming the center of the bike-making world, as I said. One measure of this was a bicycle show in Chicago in 1896, which was followed a few weeks later by a competing show in New York that did not compare favorably.
Really?
However, the cycling magazines that covered such things were all based in Chicago, so there might have been some bias there. So Schwinn from the start, they sponsored racing teams, which were kind of controversial at the time, because paying athletes was considered sort of unseemly, even though you had amateur athletes who would win prizes and they would cash the prizes in all the time. So one of their trainers was a man named Tom Eck, who was enlisted to promote the racing team and also the fact that Schwinn had the best racers on the track. He also attempted to block the great black racer Major Taylor from entering a race, not because of his color, but because he was afraid that he would win. Let's talk about Major Taylor. Does anybody know who Major Taylor is? Probably not. Okay. He should be as famous as Jesse Owens and Jackie Robinson. So let me tell you about Major Taylor. I've got some pictures about him on slide 10 if you want to look. So he is kind of only tangentially associated with Chicago. He only moved here late in his life. But I would be very remiss if I didn't tell you about him. So he was from Indianapolis, and he won his first race at the age of 18. He became the first black cyclist to become world champion in 1899 in the 1 mile sprint, and he became the second African-American world champion in any sport. The first was a boxer, George Dixon, in 1891. Major Taylor was the second. He also competed in the famous six-day races. The six-day races were these races in which you'd have a two-man team, and they would continuously bike for 6 days straight.
No.
Yes, no break. For cash and prizes, and to compete the race covering the furthest distance possible within 6 days. Absolutely brutal event. Major Taylor's fans, one of his fans was President Theodore Roosevelt, who kept track of his 17-year racing career. In 1899, at the height of his career, Major Taylor established 7 world records. His 1-mile world record of 1 minute and 41 seconds, 1 mile, from a standing start stood for 28 years. He would be considered a great sprinter today. That's how good he was. So because of the era, of course, he had to deal with discrimination of all sorts, including incidents where competitors would try to purposely injure him during races. He wrote an autobiography. He actually chose to include comments about his experiences to serve as an inspiration for other African-American athletes trying to overcome racial prejudice and discriminatory treatment in sports. His advice to African-American youths wishing to emulate him was that although bicycle racing had been the route to success for him, he would not recommend it in general. He suggested that individuals, quote, practice clean living, fair play, and good sportsmanship, and develop their best talent with a strong character, significant willpower, and physical courage. I always played the game fairly and tried my hardest, although I was not always given a square deal or anything like it. So he kind of just reminds me a lot of guys like Jackie Robinson or Jesse Owens with how they dealt with prejudice and how they just basically did what they did best and just let the results speak for themselves. I mean, he should be sort of admired, not just for his athletic skill, which was just extraordinary, but also his poise in dealing with such discrimination at the time and serving as a role model for others. So if you check out slide 10 here, I actually took a little kayaking trip on the Calumet River this summer, which goes right under the Major Taylor biking trail. And on the side of the trail under the river, they painted this wonderful series of murals of Major Taylor for everyone to see along the river. It's absolutely beautiful. He spent the final 2 years of his life in Chicago in obscurity, lost a lot of money, so he had to sort of just kind of scratch out a living at that point. He died of a heart attack in 1932 and was buried in an unmarked grave. However, in 1948, a group of former professional bicycle racers used funds donated by Frank Schwinn, Ignaz's son, who was the president of Schwinn Bicycle Company at the time, to organize his reburial in a more prominent location in Mount Glenwood Cemetery. So the Major Taylor Trail on the south side is named after him. And I actually, on one of my bike trips over to Michigan City, Indiana, I actually encountered the Major Taylor Cycling Club. Very intense guys. Those guys are very serious, let me tell you. They got the jerseys and everything. Yeah. Back to Schwinn. The bicycle boom kind of came and went by the end of the 1890s, largely because of 2 factors. There was a glut of lower quality, cheaper bikes to be had, and the rise of a new invention called the internal combustion engine, which was making its appearance on automobiles and that hybrid between the automobile and the bicycle, the motorcycle. So Schwinn, along with many other bicycle makers, tried their hand at attaching engines to bicycles to make motorcycles. So in fact, the pneumatic tire, chain drives, and differential gears, which are all standard on cars and motorcycles, were all first worked out by bicycle makers. Let's see, I got a picture of their motorcycle somewhere. Let's see, where is it? It's on one of the slides. Yep. So another first for Chicago in the world of racing was that of the first automobile race, which was also held in Chicago in 1895. Racers in the first automobile race here attempted to drive 54-mile course from Hyde Park to Evanston and back. If you go to the Museum of Science and Industry, there's actually a plaque right in the ground that indicates where the beginning of the race was. It was sponsored by the publisher of the Chicago Times-Herald to promote the new automobile industry with a prize of $5,000, quite a lot of money back then. The automobile was completely new to Americans, so much so that there was no term to describe what this thing was. They invited readers to coin a new word for it. Some of the terms considered were the horseless carriage, vehicle motor, automobile, automobile carriage, and motorcycle. The Times-Herald declared that the winning term was the motorcycle. Obviously, that didn't work out in the long term. Nobody calls it the motorcycle anymore. The race day was on Thanksgiving, with a temperature of 30 degrees with 6 inches of snow on the ground. They had promised 80 entrants, but only 11 agreed to run in such weather, and just 6 cars arrived at the start line. Oh yeah, it sounds like a Chicagoans tour, for sure. Of the 6 that actually attempted this thing, 2 finished. An imported and modified Benz from Decatur, Illinois, and a Duria, built and driven by J. Frank Duria from Springfield, Massachusetts, big name in the early automotive industry. The Derry had finished the race in 8 hours with an average speed of 7 miles per hour using 3.5 gallons of gas. It's about 15 miles per gallon, so kind of a gas guzzler by modern standards. So at this point in the story, Adolf Arnold leaves the picture. Company lore has it that Ignaz and Adolf were ready to transition from bikes into motorcycles after the bike crash, but Ignaz preferred to go it alone. So Adolf said, fine, but then you're on your own with bicycles too. So it became simply the Schwinn Company in 1907. So Schwinn bought the Excelsior company in Chicago and also the Henderson Company from Detroit and built a factory for the new motorcycle division in 1913. And the Schwinn motorcycle division became the third largest motorcycle maker in the country after Harley and Indian.
Wow.
Yes. They essentially used heavier versions of the bicycle frames and used a lightweight one-cylinder engine for the power plant. The factory was located at 3701 Cortlandt, right at the end of the 606 bike trail. It's not there anymore. It is now the YMCA. When Schwinn went bankrupt in 1992, nobody wanted the old factory on Cortlandt, so apparently the neighborhood was a little bit too rough at the time for condo development, and there's really no nearby public transportation. The Schwinn family actually tried to sell the factory to the city, but even the city didn't want it, so it was donated to the YMCA. So ironically, the old rail spur on which all those Excelsior and Henderson motorcycles started their journeys to faraway dealers and riders was converted into the 606 bike trail. So I imagine if that factory were still there, it would be a pretty prized piece of history if you're a motorcycle enthusiast. So when World War I came about, Schwinn hoped that there would be a need for a motorcycle division on the battlefield, which never really materialized. We already have tanks, I guess. You'd think it would make sense, like a nice, fast motorcycle division. Didn't happen. But so he ended up selling a good percentage of the motorcycles to the Chicago Police Force. So before the Chicago Police Force had their own cars, they rode Schwinn motorcycles, basically to enforce traffic laws. By this time, the streets are becoming increasingly clogged by cars, such as the Tin Lizzies, the Model Ts from Detroit. They're taking over. So the Great Depression comes along 10 years later, hurt sales of just about everything. Schwinn was, of course, no exception to this. Ignaz Schwinn was really never comfortable with motorcycles. He considered them very dangerous. The public had basically fully embraced the gasoline-powered automobile by this time. And I say gasoline-powered because in the turn of the century, there were also steam-powered cars and there were electric cars. It was really not clear what would dominate as far as powering cars in the future, but ended up becoming gasoline. So at this point, Ignaz retired in 1931 and retired the motorcycle division. And he lived happily in retirement in his mansion in Palmer Square until his death in 1948. At that point, his son Frank, who was there the whole time with him as the company developed, took over the presidency of the Schwinn Company and took Schwinn into its golden age. The history of Chicago's cycling tour that I mentioned earlier finished at Ignaz Schwinn's grave in Rose Hill Cemetery. And so we kind of stood around looking at his grave, and the tour guide asked, is anyone here actually riding on a Schwinn? And I looked around and I'm like, I am. I think I was the only one riding a Schwinn that day. Should have asked earlier, show of hands, who's ever ridden on a Schwinn or owned a Schwinn? Everybody? Wow, okay. Just about everybody, that's awesome. I was expecting like maybe half, maybe. They don't make them like they used to, no they don't.
No, they don't.
I'm going to take a sip of my cocktail.
Oh, yeah. Stay hydrated.
What are you drinking?
Manhattan, baby.
There you are.
Tip your bartender.
Oh, yeah. All right, so that takes Schwinn into the 1930s, and now Frank has taken over. So going on to slide 11 here. So Frank was, as I said, Ignaz's son and took over the company after his father's death. Frank attended the Armour Institute, which is now the Illinois Institute of Technology. He was very involved in the operations on the factory floor with his father, sketching out design changes and such on the floor of this cane. Quality at this point had kind of dropped industry-wide, and Schwinn was just barely hanging on. Many bicycle makers had gone out of business by this point. Schwinn was hanging on. Frank at this point took a trip to Germany, where he saw bikes there that were using an entirely new style of tire, a pneumatic tire called the balloon tire, which was already being in use in cars at the time. The balloon tire is essentially the kind of tire we use today. It's an inner tube inside of the tread, so it's really two tires in one. Much more durable and easier to fix than the glorified garden hose that was being used on bikes that Frank so hated. So Frank said, why don't we bring the double tube bicycle tire, the balloon tire, to the bicycle? We're already using them on cars. Why can't we use them on bicycles? He reached out to a number of rubber companies. No rubber company wanted to make them. So Frank called himself the Heretic. That was the nickname they gave himself, the Heretic, because he said, I'm going to go here and I'm just going to shake things up. He went to the U.S. Rubber Company and also Firestone, and he said, make me rubber tires for bicycles or I'll import them. So he was dealing with the rubber companies. Then he went to the chain stores that were selling bicycles at the time. They thought it was a stupid idea to sell a brand new bicycle frame with brand new tires. So Frank bypassed them and said, okay, I'm only going to sell my bike through independent retailers. In 3 months, the balloon tire models were a huge success, and after a year, they were standard in the industry.
Hang on.
Yeah. So, yep. Very famous ad here on slide 11 of Arnold Schwinn and Company introduces the super balloon tire bicycles. Just love that picture. It's like the bike's coming right at you. Check out these new tires. It's actually going to be fun and safe to ride. So, Schwinn introduced a new bicycle called the Aerocycle in 1934. The picture of that's right next to it, which led to another bike boom in the 1930s. Schwinn promoted this bicycle as promoted it for the grace and the beauty of the newest airliner. Okay, this is the 1930s. We've got streamlined design, Art Deco, very like brand new, era of design. This bicycle absolutely embraced all of that. If you look at the bike here, it has a teardrop shaped tank. Inside this tank, there it is, right there. There was a tool compartment. There was a place for the battery to run the taillight and the horn. I mean, it's just so cool. It looks like the Pee Wee Herman bike, if you've ever seen the Pee Wee Herman movie. Yes. Actually, the bicycle from that movie was a Schwinn. It was a Schwinn DX Cruiser from the 50s. This 1934 Aerocycle here goes for like $10,000 as a collector's item. So if you see one lying around a barn somewhere, please, for the love of God, go get it. It's worth a fortune. They even borrowed the new technique of flash welding using electric currents rather than using a torch from the aviation industry. I actually asked Patty if she could up my fee to $1,000 so I can get one. She said no, that's not happening. Could be like a company car. Donate online. There you go. Moving on to the 1940s, on slide 12, comes the Schwinn Paramount. The Schwinn Paramount was one of these newfangled lightweight bicycles designed for racers, which was designed for their sponsored racing team. However, the concept of lightweight bicycles didn't really make any money for Schwinn. Bikes at this time were still primarily marketed to children, okay? And children kind of valued style over speed, okay? This was like an era where if you were a kid, if you had a chrome-plated Schwinn, right, this is like the closest thing you'd have to your dad's Cadillac. It was just, you were the coolest kid in the block if you had a Schwinn Aerocycle in the 30s. So if you can just imagine, it's the middle of the Great Depression, right? Your dad's working like multiple shifts at the plant down the street, trying to make some extra money. You come home, it's Christmas, and there in the house is a 1934 Art Deco streamlined Schwinn Aerocycle. It must have been just the coolest thing in the world if you were a kid at the time. It's just very indicative of the era because you have, of course, the new airplanes coming out. They're all of streamlined design, going away from the biplanes to sleek monoplane design in airplanes. You also, in the railroad industry, you have the Burlington Zephyr, the new streamlined diesel electrics. If you go to the Museum of Science and Industry, the Zephyr is still there on display. So Schwinn was very much responding to what was going on in the 1930s, style-wise. So with the Schwinn Paramount, the lightweight bikes, again, really kind of meant for racers. Kids didn't really buy them. Adults certainly didn't really buy them.
Not even women?
So, like in the 40s and 50s, people, like adults, just didn't really buy bicycles. The big thing was cars. Everyone had to have a car. People were moving to the suburbs. So bicycles for adults wasn't really a huge thing yet. It was really more for children at the time. So speaking of racing, absolutely insane record was achieved by this daredevil racer named Alfred Latourneur on a custom Schwinn in 1941. There's a picture of him at the bottom right on slide 12. The history Schwinn book that I have said that he was, quote, one of the most unpredictable visitors of the clubs on Broadway and Rush Streets. I guess that meant he was like a big interesting guy to hang out with, clubbing on Rush Street back in the day. So this guy, Schwinn custom made him this bicycle here. If you look at the bicycle, if you look real close, the sprocket on the front on the pedals is absolutely massive. It's like 10 inches across. So absolutely insane gear ratio. Meant to go just as absolutely fast as possible. So they set up the stunt where he rode behind this race car on a highway in Bakersfield, California, with a windscreen attached to the car, so no wind. And you want to take a guess at how fast he ended up taking up this bike up to?
180 miles an hour.
Is it? It says on the slide. I put it right on the slide. Oops. Wah, wah. 108 miles an hour. He nearly tore the tires to shreds from the heat doing this, but the frame remained, in gleaming condition, which gave Schwinn all the publicity they would need about the quality of the bicycles. 108 miles an hour, absolutely insane. I also have an ad with Humphrey Bogart there. So you have like this guy taking a Schwinn up to 100 miles an hour. You've got Humphrey Bogart, who's like the coolest actor in the world, right? Riding on a Schwinn autocycle. Great publicity. Yeah, that's what happens when you give you the answer. So like I said, the lightweights didn't really sell. American adults just didn't bike. There was really, the era of the car in the suburbs. So it would just take another generation for the lightweights to catch on. So Frank, again, was just ahead of his time. Going to the post-war era of the 50s and 60s, this is classic Schwinn right here. Going to slide 13. So America saw a boom in the economy after World War II, and bicycles were no exception to this. Schwinn introduced the Schwinn Phantom in 1949, which became really one of the great consumer products of the post-war era, the Schwinn Phantom. The ad says it's America's favorite bicycles 9-1. That was absolutely not an exaggeration. They were coveted by literally every kid in the block and still are by collectors today. The Phantom, you can see, kept the sort of the streamlining design that was familiar from the 1930s. This had chrome on the horn tank, fenders, and even chrome on the housing for the rear reflector. So that just showed that this was an ordinary bicycle. This was like a work of art. The original Schwinn Black Phantom, if you were wondering, cost about $80 back in the 1950s. That would be about $1,000 today. Not cheap. Today, a 1950s Schwinn Black Phantom with the original seat sells for $1,000. So it's kept pace with inflation only barely. So really, in many ways, Schwinn was just kind of doing what car makers were also doing in the post-war years. They were responding to what the public wanted by listening to what the dealers were telling them. So in this way, Schwinn really became the Chevy, the Buick, and the Cadillac of bikes all rolled into one. All right, now on to the Schwinn Stingray. Got my Schwinn Stingray right here that I have hanging in my apartment. So the story of the Stingray is that by 1962, there was this new trend in Southern California where kids would take these small bikes and refit them with these handlebars that are called the Longhorn handlebars. Can't really see here, but the handlebar goes up and then out, kind of like the horn on a steer, I guess. And what would they do? So they would refit them with these handlebars. They would put banana seats on them. That's what this is called. That's the banana seat. And they would do these tricks called wheel stands on them. So kind of like an early version of like trick biking or like BMX biking. Kind of like the early versions of that. So Schwinn's lead designer he noticed this trend, developed a prototype model, tested it out, showed to the president, who said it wouldn't work. So Frank had died by this point, so this is the third president of Schwinn. He said, "This is crazy, I don't know what you're talking about, this is not going to work." So the designer disagreed and said, "Oh, people are going to love this bicycle." He said it would sell 25,000 copies by the end of the year. He was completely wrong. It sold 45,000.
Yeah!
They sold 45,000 Stingrays in 1962 alone, and it would have been higher if the suppliers had not run out of tires. So this Stingray here, that bike right there, introduced an entire generation of kids to bicycles in the 60s and encouraged them to take a bicycle on every single vacant lot or dirt mound on every construction site that they could find. I read a whole bunch of stories about these Stingrays, and the most interesting, dangerous story I've came across came out of Philadelphia. So in Philly, kids would take the ends of the bars off, fill them with go-kart fuel, okay? Then they would take a cigarette lighter at one end, and then someone else would blow in the other end of the handlebars and just blow this huge wall of flame out the other end. Just insane. Like a homemade flamethrower made out of bicycle handles. So I don't, never underestimate the capability of bored suburban kids in the 60s. Just in Philadelphia, yeah. shooting a couple decades forward into the 80s and 90s on slide 14. In the 1980s, the trend was towards lightweight road bikes for adults who were increasingly getting on bikes themselves. There was also the advent of the mountain bike and the BMX bikes. Schwinn was a little bit slow to adapt to these trends in the consumer market. So in a bit of irony, even though Schwinn kind of lost out on the mountain bike trend, the OG mountain bikers in California got their start mountain biking by modifying old Schwinns. They would take Schwinn Excelsiors from the 1930s and suit them up with like heavy-duty brakes and racing gears and just haul ass down these mountainsides and basically invented the sport of mountain biking on Schwinns. But Schwinn just really never caught on to this. They were never really able to truly compete. So in the racing world, Schwinn continued to sponsor racing teams, including a particular BMX rider from the late 80s from Dallas, who, when he decided to switch to road racing, was convinced to ride a Schwinn Paramount, and that would have been Lance Armstrong. What? Lance Armstrong's first bicycle was a Schwinn Paramount. Yep. So Schwinn has made some bad business decisions here in the 1980s. One was to move production to Mississippi in 1981, so that's the end of Schwinn in Chicago as far as bicycle making. They also offshored manufacturing first to the Giant company in Taiwan and then to another company in China. So they basically kind of created their own competitor in Giant, which at the time of the separation with Schwinn, took many of the best management people and the experience of building all of their products. And Giant went on to become the biggest bicycle maker of the world at that point. Oscar Waston, he was one of Schwinn's longtime bike dealers. He said, quote, "The first two generations of Schwinn were on the ball, good businessmen. That last generation should have been drowned." Like, wow, that's what he said. Yeah. So Schwinn ultimately was bought out by a new owner from Boulder, Colorado, headed by a Chicago investor named Sam Zell. In 1995, they actually dug through the old drawings from the original Chicago factory for the 1955 Phantom as part of the company's centennial celebration. And they remade the Phantom. They kind of made an updated version of it for the 1990s. And they sold for the full $3,000 the moment they came to the dealers. People just couldn't get enough of them. So they kind of realized that there was something to selling a bicycle with one of the most famous names in America. Okay, it meant like having a tradition of good engineering, risk-taking, and showing just a pure love of quality bicycles that really kept the family in business through the boom and the bust years for 100 years. So, taking it back to Chicago here, on the last slide, slide 15. So, bringing the story of bikes full circle back home here, let's take a brief look at how biking Chicago has progressed from the original boom years of the 1890s to today. So actually Mayor Carter Harrison Jr., who was the son of the mayor that was assassinated at the end of the World's Fair, was a biking enthusiast himself. What's that? And corrupt. Well, a corrupt Chicago mayor doesn't really narrow it down. So Carter Harrison Jr., to his credit, biked on a 100-mile round-trip ride from Chicago to Waukegan to share his campaign slogan, quote, "Not the champion cyclist, but the cyclist champion." So he won the first of 5 terms in 1897, right at the peak of the bicycle frenzy. Flash forwarding a few decades, Richard J. Daley, also a big biking proponent. He championed the development of a bikeway system in the city. He actually helped create the Lakefront Trail as a bicycle path, our only bicycle path at the time in 1963, very ahead of its time, which created just an absolutely beloved piece of the city's lakefront, which many people have fought to keep, quote, forever open, clear, and free of all buildings. By the early 70s, Chicago's bicycle population had grown to about 1 million riders, despite the only official bike path being the Lakefront Trail. The trail has evolved to the point where it nearly fulfills the vision that Daniel Burnham had in his 1909 plan for Chicago for a linear park along the entirety of the lakefront that would stretch all the way to the city's limits and be used for the people. More recently, there has been a trend with people increasingly ditching the car and relying on bikes for transportation. This involves converting abandoned rail lines to trails, which is known as the Rails to Trails movement. The 606 Bike Trail was created in 2013 from an abandoned rail trail, or abandoned rail line, the Bloomingdale branch, as a linear park and as a neighborhood connector. And there are actually plans in Bronzeville to do the same. The Kenwood branch of the L is still there, pieces and parts of it. It was used to take workers to the Union stockyards back in the day. It was abandoned in the 1950s, and there is a big movement to try to create a version of the 606 in Bronzeville. The 606 cost, what was the figure, $90 million, I believe. The Bronzeville project, they estimated would be about the same. So there's absolutely no reason why that can't happen. So Chicago, being the nation's railroad hub, is very fortunate to have many trails converging on it from some of the old rail lines that have now been converted into bike paths, which makes it very, very easy to take a long ride from the city on any of these trails and then back via the Metro, which I have done many times with friends. I actually have a friend who works for Metro, so he very much advocates for doing such things, using the Metro as part of our biking infrastructure. So just to kind of wrap up my story here, I think if Ignaz Schwinn were still alive, okay, and he could see how far the bike has come in Chicago from the early days where daredevils took to the cobblestone streets on penny farthings and women tearing off the shackles of Victorian society on a Schwinn safety bike, to today where biking is more popular than ever. And cities like Chicago are working very hard to make bicycle infrastructure ever more accessible to everyone. I think you'd be very proud.
Excellent.
Questions? Yes, sir.
Are there any bicycle companies in Chicago right now?
Are there any bicycle companies in Chicago now? Not that I'm aware of. The biggest ones today are Giants and Cannondale.
There was one at the plate. Do you know the plant?
The plant.
It's called?
Yeah.
There's some guy. Now that I think about it, on the top floor, there's some guys who are making bicycles, but
Okay.
it's kind of
Kind of like a small homegrown thing.
yeah.
Sure.
But there aren't any large companies.
Not that I'm aware of.
Are they making bicycles in the U.S.? You know?
Cannondale, I believe, is based in the U.S. I think they're headquartered in the U.S. I think like in this day and age, you might have Cannondale that's based in the U.S., but they probably outsource various components to different companies. Like for example, like Shimano is a Japanese company that makes lots of bicycle components today. So Shimano will make a bunch of parts. The tire's going to come from somewhere else, but the design, a Cannondale design, would be from the United States. Yeah.
So somebody, when I told them I was coming, they said, make sure you ask the speaker if they know about bicycle face.
Bicycle face.
Okay, so
I do not know of bicycle
I
face.
had to look it up, and apparently it was
Is that a thing?
to dissuade women from riding bicycles because it was giving them freedom and access.
Okay.
It was a health problem made up to scare them away from bicycling.
Okay. Didn't involve like this question was, is there something called bicycle face?
So yes,
And it was a thing.
and it was a thing.
Okay.
So I just didn't know if it
Did that involve like the face being flushed or something? Because I think I heard stories of like, you know.
Overexertion.
Right, okay.
Yeah, a wearied, exhausted bicycle face.
Right.
Oh,
Right. So right.
but
Women got on bicycles. Polite society didn't like this. They're
Right.
they're wearing pants. They're bicycling, and their faces are getting flushed from the exertion.
oh god.
You know, we can't have this. It's just
Clutch
yes.
those pearls, people.
Right. And it's allowing their freedom of movement. We just can't. You know, there's just so many things that we just can't have in society.
I just double checked. I know Shinola is associated with Detroit, and they're manufactured, fabricated in Waterford, Wisconsin,
Okay.
and then assembly is taking place in Detroit.
Okay. So Waterford bicycles or Shinola.
Shinola.
Shinola bicycles have manufacturing in the
Someone in
United
the
States.
comments mentions that SRAM is a big components manufacturer, and they're based in Chicago.
Okay. Very cool.
Lots of people in the comments suddenly clutching their pearls.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
Tell me the name on your Stingray photo of that bicycle seat and the handlebars.
The name of the model
So what is
or
no.
or-
Tell me what is commonly referred to as the name of the seat.
it's called a banana seat.
There you go.
Yes.
What about those handlebars?
They're called the Longhorn handlebars.
There's another name.
I think there's like angle bars or
Sissy bars.
sissy bars. Okay. Yeah. Different regional names for the bars.
My brother on the banana seat and my sissy bar.
You can't
the
call them
banana
sissy
seat
bars
and
if
sissy
they're
bars.
gasoline in them.
Right?
Are there any internet questions?
No, that's what they
No
call
internet
them.
questions, yeah.
Okay.
Question.
Mhm.
You mentioned dealership
Yep.
or dealer?
Dealers,
What-
yes.
What was the whole process of buying a bicycle, I guess? Was there like a Schwinn dealership?
Sure. Yes. So Schwinn.
Repeat the question.
Right. So the question was, what are dealerships, bicycle dealerships? What is the process there? So back in the day, most bicycle makers would sell their bikes through chain stores, like Woolworths, Sears, stuff like that. Schwinn did not. Schwinn cultivated a whole network of independent dealers, so like tiny little bicycle shops that where they knew the owners and kind of cultivated a relationship with them, because Schwinn wanted quality. They were all about, like, the stamp that's on the, this picture here, or if you go to the, you have that page there. This stamp was on every single Schwinn bike, and it says Schwinn quality Chicago. Okay, they were super proud of the fact that they're from Chicago and that they made the highest quality bikes possible. And what they didn't what they didn't want was to have to deal with chain stores that would undercut them and try to sell them cheaply, or deal with their competitors who were making cheaper, shoddier bikes. So Schwinn basically said, forget the chain stores. We're just going to go through our own independent dealer network of dealers. And that's kind of how they got the ideas for all these different models. Was their dealers would tell them, hey, like, all these people are coming in that want a lighter bike, or they want a chrome bike, or they want balloon tires. You should, or like, these crazy banana seats. You should maybe consider introducing a model like that. So that's how Schwinn's kind of able to stay on top of trends. Yeah. Good.
Oh, I'm sorry. You said what eventually happened to Schwinn?
So Schwinn, they outsourced their manufacturing starting in the 80s, and they eventually went bankrupt in 1995, I believe. And I believe Giant from Taiwan, the Giant company, bought the Schwinn brand and made bicycles under the Schwinn brand. And they eventually spun off and became their own company, their own competitor to Schwinn. So you can still buy bikes today with the Schwinn brand, but they're not made by. There's no Schwinn company anymore, but the brand still exists.
Right.
Yeah. So if you have a Schwinn after like 95, it's going to be made from Taiwan or China. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I have a really dumb question. You mentioned the patent office. I don't know that much about patents.
I don't either.
Say a little bit more about patents.
I wish I knew more about patents. I'm not a patent lawyer.
I know a lot about patents.
Great.
What would you like to know?
I'd like to know everything. I don't know how does it work.
It comes
Several hours.
right.
Should we do that? Should we do that? Should we,
I started in Chicago, so I don't think it.
So.
Patty
I do have a
knows.
question from the internet.
Okay.
Sarah,
Mhm.
you might know her.
Yep.
Asks, how much would a Schwinn cost when they first came out?
So how much would a Schwinn cost when it first came out? Depends on the model. Like I said, the Schwinn Phantom in the 50s cost about $80. So, and that was not their top of the line bike, but that was definitely the most popular model in the 50s. So I would say range $60 to $100 somewhere in there in the 1950s, which is about, let's call it $800 to $1,200 in today's money in the 1950s. So it wasn't cheap. You had to save up to buy a bike like that. Now, of course, you had options. You could buy a cheaper, crappier bike. But the Schwinns were really made to last. When you bought a Schwinn, that thing was not falling apart. It was not going to rust out.
Was Schwinn at the Columbian Exposition?
Was Schwinn at the Columbian Exposition? No, because Schwinn wasn't created yet. Schwinn was created in 1895. The World's Fair was 2 years before that. So bicycles were at the World's Fair, but Schwinn had not been created yet.
So it seems self-evident now that you have the two wheels are equal size and
Mhm.
it's a really good design. What was the rationale originally for like this one giant wheel and one really tiny wheel?
So the question was, why do bicycles have two equally sized tires today? And back in the 1880s, one tire was so much bigger than the other. So today's bicycle, you have a sprocket on the front on your pedals and another sprocket on the rear wheel with a chain connecting the two. And the gear ratio is what allows the back tire or the back wheel to spin faster than your feet are going. So your feet are going this fast, the back tire is going way faster because of the gear ratio. That's what's allowing you to go faster. Of course, we have gear shifters now, so you can adjust what that gear ratio is. Before chains and sprockets, there was no such mechanism. So the 1880s penny farthings, you're pedaling the front wheel directly. Okay. So the only way to make it go faster is to make the wheel bigger. That's the only way. So there just really wasn't the manufacturing prowess at the time to make things like chain links and sprockets and have the two mesh well together. It takes some precision manufacturing to do that.
Good question.
So, yeah.
When did that happen? The gears, the links and the gears?
So that occurred with the safety bike, which came around 1885. That's the advent of that
What inspired that
shift.
that shift? Yeah.
So the penny farthings, the high wheelers, are just very dangerous. As you can imagine, it's very hard to get on one of those things. Yeah, I've actually done it myself. You have to you have to walk up to this thing and start moving, and then get on the high wheel to get up there, and then stopping and getting off is equally difficult. So it's just not easy or safe to ride on one of those. So that's why it's called the safety bike. When you have two wheels the same size, it's a lot safer because you're closer to the ground, your center of gravity is lower, you're not as tippy.
So I teach elementary school, and we do a reading test, and one of the texts we use is about bicycles, and they talk about how it's called the bone shakers.
The bone shakers.
The first bicycles
Yep.
were called bone shakers because they would literally shake your bones because
Yep.
there was no double wheels. Yeah.
Also back at the time, there was no paved roads, and the tires there was no pneumatic tires. Remember, before the balloon tire, it was basically hard rubber or just wood.
Yeah.
The Velocipiece from the 1860s was just a wooden wheel,
Almost a wagon.
That's why
like a
women
wagon
ride
wheel.
bikes down.
Yeah, so so they were derisively called bone shakers because you're riding on a wooden wheel on terrible streets.
Yeah.
That's Stephanie?
When did bike lanes become a thing?
When did bike lanes become a thing? Ooh, that's been sort of kind of a city by city process. You know, some cities are much more bike friendly than others. So that's a good question. You have to ask a city planning expert on exactly when specifically, say, Chicago got their first bike lanes. I would, if I had to hazard a guess, probably in the 80s or the 90s, somewhere in there, because that's really when adults started biking more.
I don't remember that.
Maybe not even then. Maybe not even until
Yeah, it gets more recent.
more recent than that, possibly.
I'm sure in Europe. Really?
Yeah. When will
Europe is certainly more
Chicago-
ahead of the curve.
Amsterdam.
When will Chicago automobile drivers start respecting the bike lanes? Because
When the
Every
bike lanes are physical instead
yeah,
of going
instead
like
of
you-
just paint. Yeah.
Right.
Every morning I go into this one Dunkin' Donuts, and
I
there
couldn't find
is
out what street it was.
like a
Yeah.
physical
Major road.
cement barrier,
Mhm.
but still people will turn and they'll block the bike lane and
Right.
the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And then they don't understand why the bikers are mad because, you know,
It's a.
I'm
It's
a driver,
sure.
but also a biker, and like, can we just respect each
It's-
other's space?
It's certainly an issue because we only have so much street space, and you can see there's this general trend towards taking some space away from the cars and dedicating either a painted bike lane at the very least, or some sort of protected dedicated bike lane, either using what's called bollards or a whole concrete barrier. If you look at the Damon Avenue Bridge over the river, that used to be 2 lanes. They took one entire lane and made a bike lane, a 2-directional contraflow bike lane out of it, both sides, with the protection. So it's a slow process. It takes a lot of time to get that sort of through the bureaucracy. But you can see the trend, like Belmont Avenue, they just repaved that over the river and put in a protected bike lane there as well. So like the east-west methods of getting from one side of the city has gotten so much easier because of that. Of course, we have the 606 as well.
We can take 1 to 2 more questions. Anybody over here?
So can you talk a little about the 606
Mhm.
and how it became bicycle friendly? Because originally when they designed it, it was supposed to just be a walking trail.
Right.
Good question.
Yeah. So the development of the 606 took a long time. It opened in 2013, but there's this whole grassroots nonprofit group that was developed from people who live in that neighborhood.
2006. Before the
2006. Took like 10 years.
Friends of the Bloomingdale Trail.
Friends of the Bloomingdale Trail, yes. So yeah, the Bloomingdale branch, I think rail operations shut down in like the early 2000s, and then they ripped out the rails and it was just abandoned. And I don't exactly know the exact process of how it turned into what it is today, but they had this idea of like, let's just get all these property owners to get on board with restoring this, getting rid of all the trash and all the weeds and everything, and making it into a running and biking path that is really a neighborhood connector. If you've ever been to the High Line in New York, it's amazing, but it's really not meant for like running and biking on. Whereas the 606, I use it all the time. If I'm going from one side of the city, like if I'm going from Wicker Park to, Humboldt or something, the 606 is absolutely like a godsend for that. And so it's really like a fundamentally important way to connect neighborhoods together.
Yeah, and I had heard that it was the federal government. When they got them about, they said we have to make a bike lane out of it,
Okay.
put bikes on it in order to get the rest of the money. So
Yeah.
that's why I was wondering if you'd heard the same thing.
Mhm.
Because they were just going to make it like the highway.
Okay.
One more question.
Sure.
In the first heyday of bikes, in like the early 1900s or whatever,
Mhm.
where did people park them?
Where did people park bikes in the early days of the bicycle? That's a good question. Where they parked them? Well, not too many people were on bikes for one thing, so it probably wasn't like a real issue. I don't think bike locks were a thing. I think you would set it outside next to the horse drop, and nobody took it. or you took it inside with you.
Where did people park their horses?
Yeah.
Like you just.
Weren't there like hitching posts for horses?
Horse, thing, like,
You bring like a club for a horse and just like lock it up. I don't know. Yeah. All right. Sounds good.
Thank you so much, Walter. I will be Googling videos of penny farthings now. Folks, friendly reminder, tickets next week are sold out, but go ahead and get on the wait list. Tickets are available for the week after. Learn about the marathon and other sporting firsts with Courtney. And then also, please, on your way out, throw us some cash, throw us a check, scan one of the many QR codes. We would love some donations. Thanks for coming out. See you next week.